Hey guys, it's Michael from Fire and Brilliance, and today we have a very exciting subject. It's about rubies. One of my personal favorites, by the way. That's the reason why I'm wearing red. If you guys have been following me, you may know that I love the color red. Rubies, since they're red, I obviously love those as well. So that being said, I do want to do a breakdown of natural rubies, what they are, what they're about, how they're priced, and so on. Okay, so I'm gonna get right into it for you. Today we are talking about natural rubies. What are rubies? Let me first of all talk about the mineral that's made of. It's called corundum. Okay, so what many people do not know is that sapphires as well as rubies are made of the same mineral that is going to be made into a gemstone, which is corundum. Okay, so anything other than rubies is considered a sapphire. Right, so when you think about blue sapphires, pink sapphires, white sapphires, yellow sapphires, they're basically a ruby, but they can't be called a ruby because anything that's made of corundum that is not a ruby is sapphire. So what is a ruby then? A ruby is basically a really red sapphire. That's essentially the same thing, right? And the reason why it's red is because there's a trace, or there are traces of chromium in it, okay, which makes the color. Now that being said, with rubies, there are various, situations where many people will debate on whether a ruby is really a pink sapphire or whether a pink sapphire is a ruby. Typically, in order to call a sapphire or corundum a ruby, it usually falls into a very specific color class, okay? So, such as a very pinkish, purplish, orangey or brownish reds. Okay, so it's typically on the darker side of things. If it's a little too bright pink or light pink, then it will fall into a pink sapphire. So that's a little up for debate, but for the most part, if you take a look at a ruby, you should be able to recognize it because it's really deep and dark. It's really, the saturation is there. So when you see a ruby, you should be able to recognize the darkness of the red, kind of like my shirt, okay? So that being said, those are the colors, usually in the medium to darker color tones in order to recognize a ruby. Now, ruby's been around for a very, very long time. It's been discovered in many parts of the world. It's been worn on royalty, to people on engagement rings, to obviously to even some everyday wear for very specific fancy types of events. Okay, so it's been around for a very long time. It's a popular look, and the reason being is because of the symbolism that it symbolizes, right? So it actually symbolizes wealth and power, and at the same time, the protection of misfortune. So for this reason alone, I love rubies personally. But that being said, that's just more of the beautiful myth and romance behind a ruby. But the other really beautiful part about a ruby is that in terms of natural minerals, is actually second hardest next to only diamonds at a Mohs scale of a 9. So if you've been following this channel, you have been listening to a lot about moissanite. And when I've mentioned moissanite before, moissanite is the second hardest stone next to diamonds at about 9.25 to 9.5. Diamonds on a Mohs scale is a 10. Okay, moissanite is about a 9.25 to 9.5, but because moissanite or the chemical compound that makes up moissanite, silicon carbide, cannot be found in nature to make gems, or it's not large enough, therefore it has to be man-made. So if you are referring to something that can be found in nature that's large enough to be made into a gemstone in terms of a natural mineral, then actually rubies and sapphires, or corundum, is actually next to only diamonds at a Mohs scale of a 9. So it's actually very hard, very tough. It has very nice luster to it, so that's the reason why it's very popular in jewelry. So typically when you think about gemstones other than diamonds and moissanite, which are clear gemstones, typically when you think about precious and semi-precious colored gemstones, most people do or have heard of rubies and sapphires, right? So typically blue sapphires more than the other colors, but rubies and sapphires are very popular because of the hardness. The hardness allows it to be worn for the long term. Although it's not as hard as diamonds, and that's the reason why diamonds are so popular, it's second hardest next to only diamonds, especially if you like color, right? So if you want red rubies, green emeralds, blue sapphires, but in the corundum family, the mineral family, basically blue sapphires or sapphires in general as well as rubies are second hardest next to only diamond if you want natural colors on your finger, natural colored gemstones on your fingers, okay? Obviously depends on where you wear your jewelry. Now that being said, obviously, in today's world, the modern world, there are two versions or two types of gemstones because they can be found in nature, and now most gemstones can be created in a lab. Again, the only difference is that one is man-made and one is found in nature. One is created in a lab and one is uncovered in Mother Earth. So it just really depends on what you like, what you want on your finger, the budget that you have in order to purchase these gemstones, as well as your own style and preferences typically will determine whether or not a person will go with either a natural versus a lab created gemstone. All right. So on top of that, there are other reasons too, ethical reasons that I've gone over in my other videos. If you do want to check that out, and then we'll go ahead and link it right here so that you can go and click on there. Okay. So that being said, where are natural rubies found? For the most part, historically, very high-graded rubies were typically found in Asia, but they are also found in the U.S., Australia, as well as Africa, okay? But if you are talking about rubies historically that's been worn on, with royalty, with royal families from centuries ago, typically most of the rubies of many centuries ago were found in Asia, all right? So such as Burma, which is a very, very popular location for natural rubies. So when people are referring to Burmese rubies, those are typically very preferred, especially if those rubies were found many decades ago, as well as Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. So these are all countries in Southeast Asia. And there's also very beautiful rubies in Sri Lanka, Madagascar, as well as Mozambique, okay? Now, these rubies can be found, and they do range in varieties. What does that basically mean? Sometimes the color's a little lighter, sometimes the color's a little darker, sometimes the saturation is very vivid, sometimes they're not, sometimes it's a little clearer, sometimes it's a little, there's just a huge variety. But for the most part, the most beautiful rubies that most people typically talk about, most of the times originally came from Burma. So when they're talking about Burmese rubies, there's actually a trade terminology for a very specific type of color. I personally do not know where this terminology came from because the wording of it sounds a little off to me. Personally to me it sounds it doesn't slip off my tongue because it's referring to blood, but it's called pigeon blood. Okay, so when you are purchasing natural rubies, if the jeweler is referring to pigeon blood color, that is a very old terminology, a very historical terminology that people refer to as pigeon blood, which is a very ideal colored red when it comes to rubies, where it's a purplish red, medium to dark tone with very vivid saturation. Now, what does that mean? Dark tones and vivid saturation, all that means is the color is nicely spread out throughout, it's deep and dark, and it gives it a vibrant and a very dark color. So similar to my shirt that I'm wearing, you could tell that it's very nicely spread out and thin, especially in Mother Nature when it's so chaotic. It's very hard to find something that is just that in that supreme and beautiful condition. So typically when people are referring to pigeon blood rubies, then it's an ideal color of red, purplish red, medium to dark tone with vivid saturation. Now hopefully that helps you out, because if you are in the market to look for a ruby, this is definitely a terminology that you may want to bring up to your jeweler, that you're looking specifically for a type of color, and so that they can specifically look out on that for you, okay? And I've mentioned this many times in the past as well when it comes to colored gems. When it comes to colored natural gems, the process of uncovering the gem and then enhancing it is absolutely normal. It's a very common industry practice to enhance the colors, to enhance the overall look and feel of the gemstone. So to make it look brighter, nicer, more vivid, more saturated, many times they do have to go through a specific enhancement process, whether it's been treated, whether it's been filled, whether it's been heated. These processes make the gemstone look much, much nicer, okay? But when, so obviously if it's been enhanced, that means it's been slightly modified by man. And when that is the case, then the prices will go down. If you are able to find a ruby that is pigeon blood, that is just in premier and beautiful condition, that has never been enhanced, it can be very expensive. So that goes to my next point. What is the price of a ruby? That is extremely dependent on the quality of the ruby and how rare it is, okay? So very high quality rubies can be extremely rare. And I've mentioned this many times in the past. Many people, when they think about natural gemstones, they constantly think about diamonds, and diamonds are rare. That's up for debate. But when it comes to colored gemstones, I'll tell you right now, if you're looking for a really good, beautiful gemstone that has never been enhanced, where the colors are naturally the way it is because it's been uncovered from the earth, cut, polished, and never been enhanced in any kind of heating process, any kind of treatment process, any kind of filling process. And if it's not a lab-created gemstone but a natural gemstone, it can be very expensive. And I'll give you a few examples, okay? So a top-colored ruby can be so rare that no trade data is actually that valid or available. So for example, in 2015, a top colored 25.5 carat ruby sold for over $1 million per carat. So since it's at 25.5 carats, that's over $25.5 million for that one ruby, all right? And for a very clean to very good colored retail ruby, where the size is about a 1/2 carat to a 1 carat, and we're talking about high clarity grade, a beautiful, vivid, saturated ruby with close to a pigeon, or if not a pigeon blood color, can go anywhere, range anywhere between $10,000 to $18,000 per carat, and we're referring to stones that are less than a carat big, or weighs less than a carat, all right? And in terms of the valuation criteria, obviously the color is dependent. It depends on the color. It depends on the origin, where it came from. Burmese rubies are typically sought after a lot. It also depends if it's been treated. As I've mentioned to you before, even though a natural gemstone is natural and not a lab, it can still be modified by man. In other words, it has to be treated to enhance the color. So if it's been treated, then the prices will go down. If it's naturally that way and that beautiful, then obviously the prices will go up because it's much more rare. All right, and it depends on the clarity of the cut as well as the carat weight of the gemstone. All right, so that's a few of these determining factors as to how it is going to be priced, whether it's been treated, whether it's a lab versus a natural, and whether it's rare or not rare, and how big it is, and cut, color, clarity as well. All right, so that's pretty much the wrap of the rubies, right? So that is exactly what most people, or the information that most people are looking for when they're looking for a ruby. So hopefully this information has been valuable to you, especially if you're in the market to look for a ruby, that you know exactly what you're looking for. These are the types of things that you should be paying attention to, as well as the types of questions in terms of the terminology that you should be asking your jeweler, so that you know that you're getting a very high quality, beautiful ruby. The next part of this process is that I will go ahead and go with a breakdown of the difference between a natural ruby and a very comparable lab-created ruby, so that you can see the difference between what they look like in terms of their quality as well as the pricing, and then you can make the decision for yourself if you are entertaining the thought of a natural versus a lab. This is a natural ruby. That being said, as you can tell, this is a very red, very beautiful color. It's very saturated throughout the entire ruby here. Let me put on the white gloves so you can see it a little better. That being said, this is approximately a 7.75 millimeter
in terms of length to width ratio. Okay, and the total carat weight of this specific stone is approximately 2.09 carats, or about 2.1 total carat weight. All right, so it does not have any fluorescence. All right, it's definitely red in color. The clarity is it's actually quite nice, but it is included. This is definitely a natural ruby unearthed from the earth. Obviously faceted by a master cutter to basically create this gemstone. Now, that being said, it's extremely important that we also note that this is definitely a treated ruby. All right, so it's definitely been enhanced to maximize the output of the color and also to maximize the overall clarity of the gemstone. So it's been not only been treated in terms of being heated, but it's also been filled as well. All right. So as I had mentioned earlier, in the Geminar, rubies can cost quite a bit if it comes in pristine and perfect condition without ever being enhanced or treated, as high as about $1 million per carat. In terms of very good, clean, colored types of rubies that's have a very nice color to it with a very good clarity grade that's never been treated. It can all still range anywhere between the tens of thousands of dollars per carat for a size that's less than a carat. All right. In this case, since it's definitely been treated, been enhanced, at the same time to improve not only the color but the clarity of the stone, then the price is a little less. All right, so this one will typically retail anywhere between $12,000 to $15,000 per stone in terms of this specific type of quality. Okay. Also, it is dependent again, and I do mention this quite often because it's also dependent on who you buy it from, where you buy it from, which vendor or supplier you buy it from, which brand you're purchasing it from. Are you buying it from a mom and pop shop? Are you buying it from a big branded retail store? It really depends what you're getting out of it. So that being said, that is really dependent on the price. But on the average, it's going to cost anywhere between $12,000 to $15,000 in terms of this type of a grade, type of ruby that's been enhanced, been treated, been heated, as well as been filled. But at the same time, it's really nice. So let me go and turn it around so you can take a look here. As you can see in the back, if you take a look right through the gemstone, you'll see that there is definitely inclusions inside of the gemstone, and at the outside, right at the bottom on the sides of the pavilion right there. Let me go ahead and point at it. There's a chip right there. It looks like it's a natural. It doesn't look like it's an intentional chip. In other words, it looks like it's a natural part of the gemstone that's been faceted down. But in other words, it's obviously not a perfect ruby, right? But still, even at this caliber, the gemstone is still quite expensive. Again, ranging on the average market retail price in 2019. The month now is October of 2019. Should still cost you anywhere between $12,000 to $15,000 for the stone. All right. So that being said, I'm going to place that one down. And typically, I try to find gemstones that are going to be as close in proximity in terms of just not the grade, but in terms of the size and the weight as much as possible, if and when possible, so that we're comparing apples to apples. All right. So this is an 8mm, a lab-created, lab-grown, and then faceted ruby. The only difference between this gemstone and the one there is that one was unearthed from the earth and faceted afterwards. This one was grown in the lab and then faceted afterwards. All right, that's the first difference. Obviously, this one's man-made, and that one is a natural from the earth. The second difference is if you take a look here, the color is very similar to that of the natural. Here, let me put the natural back on for you so you can take a look there. It's very similar in color. So they're both very beautiful. It's very vibrant, has a vivid, saturated type of look. The look that you want to see in a ruby, the color that you want to see in a ruby, especially if you want the red, beautiful color to really show. So the color is definitely there. So as you can see, both colors are very similar. Now the difference between the lab versus the natural is that when anything is created in a laboratory, it's within a controlled environment. And the more people can control the environment, the better the quality of the gemstone. So as you can see, if you take a look right through this gemstone, from the top of the crown looking down, even to the pavilion looking down, or the pavilion facing up, if you look down into it, you will not be able to see any inclusions with the naked eye. So it's a very clear, high quality stone, right? And obviously, it doesn't have that chip or any chips around the pavilion, nor the top portion of the gemstone called the crown of the gemstone. So in other words, if you're purchasing a lab created gemstone, then obviously you're purchasing a higher quality one. Again, it's because it's created in a lab, so the environment can be controlled, and therefore the output of the gemstone typically will have a higher quality type of output, right? So the lab created ruby here at an 8 millimeter, although it's just slightly bigger than this natural, it should cost you anywhere between $950 to about $1,000. An 8 millimeter lab grown ruby at this specific type of high quality output. All right, so that being said, as I had mentioned in the Geminar just a little bit ago in the presentation, both is made of the same mineral, corundum. The only difference here is that the output is red, and therefore it's considered a ruby. If it's any other color other than red, then it will be considered a sapphire, since it's made of the same type of mineral. All right, so there is no difference between what it's made of. Both are made of corundum. The only difference is that this is again a natural that was found in Mother Earth. Someone was able to uncover it, and then it was faceted into a beautiful natural ruby. This other one is a lab grown, created in a lab, then faceted, but nonetheless both are made of the same type of material. Both have a hardness that is measured on the Mohs scale of a 9 in terms of natural minerals, the second hardest next to only diamonds, which are both rubies and sapphires at a Mohs scale of 9. So it's a very beautiful gemstone that can last a lifetime as long as you take care of it right? And that's the reason why rubies and sapphires are so popular next to diamonds, because it is a harder mineral type that can be used as gemstones. Now, if we are to go to compare both labs and naturals, what are the pros and cons? Obviously, that's up for debate. Again, my job here is just to present to you, if you are in the marketplace and you're looking for something, or you're just looking for more information as to why you should choose one over the other, then hopefully this serves you. Hopefully this provides you with some value. I mean, there's really no right or wrong answer. If you prefer to go with the natural, then that's pretty much what you're going to look at, unless you want a higher quality, and obviously the prices of a higher quality natural will also increase as well. If you're looking for a lab, then that's basically essentially what you're going to get, a very high quality gemstone at that specific price point, as I mentioned earlier. This one costing anywhere between $13,000 to $15,000, whereas this one will cost anywhere between $950 to $1,000 US dollars. Okay, this being a lab and that being a natural. And this is exactly the color that I would say you should look out for, especially if you're going with a ruby. Sometimes it's a little deeper and darker. Sometimes it may be a little lighter. But preferably in the marketplace, what you're looking for is something with this type of really just red, vibrant color that's very saturated. It's a little darker than a light pink, but not too dark where it's going to look like a deep dark purple, right? So this is typically the color that most people want when they think of rubies, and so if that is something that you're looking for, then hopefully this helps you out. And what I'll do next, I'll go ahead and weigh both of these gemstones so you can really see how much they weigh based on these approximate millimeter sizes, and at the same time go ahead and measure them for you as well. All right, so the first stone that I'm going to measure is the natural that I had just gone over with you. This should be approximately 2.09 in carats. total carat weight. Okay. There you go. It's a 2.089, 2.1. So that's exactly what's supposed to weigh. So this is definitely the natural that I took out and unboxed. The second stone that I will be weighing is the lab-created, lab-grown ruby. And this one, since it's slightly heavier than the natural, since it's slightly larger at 8 millimeters as opposed to 7.76 millimeters, this one should definitely weigh a little more. And there you go. That one's at 2.679. If I'm reading that correctly, it's 2.679. So that's the difference. But at the end of the day, they both do look very close in size. I tried to make it as close as possible, but this natural was the closest I was able to find in comparison to the lab. And there you go. So those are the two different measurements. With the natural weighing slightly less, obviously, because it's also slightly smaller in terms of the overall millimeter size. Alright, so the first stone that I will be measuring the millimeter length of the stone here is the natural ruby. This one should be approximately 7.75 millimeters in terms of the overall diameter. There you go, which is about there. And then the lab-grown ruby that I had measured or compared it to should be approximately 8 millimeters in overall diameter. So let me go and put that down. There you go, slightly heavier or slightly more than an 8 millimeter. And that's the reason why both gemstones weighed the way it did. Obviously, the lab is slightly wider in terms of the millimeter, the diameter in millimeters, and therefore the overall weight also proved that it's also heavier as well. So in other words, if both are made of the same minerals, and technically they should weigh the same regardless of, as long as the measurements are the same, because the mineral that's being made of is exactly the same. Now, since this one is slightly smaller, then it proves that it's also going to weigh less as well, and that one is the natural, and again, that is the lab.
So that being said, I hope you really like what you saw here. If you are looking for a colored gemstone, especially if you love red rubies, then this brings some value to you. Go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Let us know what you like, let us know what you don't like, let us know what you want to learn next. Then we do, again, also document everything that you request on a list, and once the request is more and more common and we feel as if that's an important topic, then we will spend the time to make a video just for you. Okay, so thanks again for tuning in. I'll see you again next time. Goodbye.